What if Hollywood legend Harrison Ford sat down for what should have been a routine interview and ended up in the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history? The answer will shock you. And by the end of this fictional dramatization, you'll understand why one of America's most beloved actors walked off a set for the first time in his 50-year career. Before we dive into this incredible fictional dramatization story, make sure you read the disclaimer, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what you think really happened behind the scenes. Your support keeps these stories coming, and trust me, you won't want to miss what unfolds next. Harrison Ford had agreed to appear on The View to promote his latest project, anticipating the usual light-hearted back and forth, maybe a few nostalgic quips about his long career, or some harmless teasing about his age. At 79, Ford had been through more interviews than he could count, facing everything from tabloid frenzy to tough press tours, always managing to handle it all with his signature dry humor and unshakable cool. But nothing in his decades-long career had prepared him for what was coming. The day began like any other. Ford arrived early, a habit forged through years of professionalism, and greeted the staff with familiar ease. He joked with the makeup artist, remarking, half amused, half sarcastic, about her decade-long quest to de-age him for cameras. He seemed relaxed, cooperative, and even eager to discuss his new film, which he clearly believed in. Those around him described the atmosphere as light until it suddenly wasn't. Joy Behar, one of the show's most recognizable voices, had spent her morning in focused preparation. Unlike her usual casual approach, sources backstage noted a different energy. Intense phone calls, whispered consultations with producers, and meticulous review of notes. When someone asked if she was planning anything controversial, she offered only a cryptic smile. Let's just say it's going to be an interesting interview. The show opened in typical fashion. Upbeat music, laughter among the co-hosts, and a lively studio audience. Ford walked out to a standing ovation, flashing that world-famous crooked grin. He settled into his seat like a man who'd done this 1,000 times. And he had. Everything, at least initially, seemed to follow the script. Whoopi Goldberg kicked off with standard questions. The physical challenges of his role, a few light jabs about stunt doubles, and some behind-the-scenes stories that had the audience chuckling. Ford leaned into the humor, showing his usual charm and command of the room. But Joy Behar had barely spoken. She sat quietly, hands clasped, gaze fixed forward. It was unlike her. When Whoopi finally passed the floor to her, everything shifted. "I actually have something I'd like to bring up," Joy said, her tone slicing through the room like a cold wind. "Harrison, let's talk about your politics and how they've changed over time." Ford raised an eyebrow but didn't flinch. "I'm here to talk about the film, Joy." "Oh, and we'll get to that," she replied with a tight smile. "But I think your political stance is relevant, especially given some recent things you said about climate change and social justice. Don't you think celebrities have a duty to use their platforms responsibly?" While the question wasn't overtly hostile, the delivery was loaded with intent. Ford sensed it immediately and shifted his posture slightly, squaring up. "I think everyone's entitled to their views," he said, voice even. "And yes, I care deeply about the environment. I speak about what matters to me, but I try to keep it separate from my work." Joy wasn't buying it. "Interesting," she said, her voice coated with a sugary challenge, "because I've been looking into your track record, and it doesn't quite match your message. You talk about saving the planet, but let's be honest, how do you justify flying private jets everywhere while lecturing the rest of us on carbon emissions?" It was a bold swing. The room went still. Ford's jaw tightened, though his tone remained composed. "That's an oversimplification," he said. "Environmental issues are nuanced. I try to offset where I can, and I live my life responsibly." Joy scoffed. "Offsetting? Harrison, come on. You've taken more private flights this year than most people take in a lifetime. You live in multiple luxury homes. You drive vintage cars. You think that's responsible? Ford stayed silent a beat longer this time, the audience catching on to the rising tension. The other hosts glanced around uncomfortably. I don't go around lecturing people, Joy. I raise awareness. There's a difference. Joy leaned in, eyes gleaming. But when you're flying from coast to coast in a jet that burns more fuel in one trip than an average family uses in a year, that's not just awareness, that's hypocrisy. Ford's grip on the chair tightened. You're attacking my personal life based on headlines. Oh, it's not just headlines, she countered, reaching under the desk and pulling out a folder. I've got public records, tax filings for your environmental foundation, flight data, real estate reports. This isn't gossip, it's documentation. That was the tipping point. The energy in the studio flipped from curious to chaotic. Ford leaned forward, voice sharper now. What is this? A hit job? Are you trying to turn this into a circus just for ratings? Joy didn't blink. It's accountability, Harrison. You can't be the poster boy for environmentalism while living like none of the rules apply to you. Ford finally snapped. You want to talk about accountability? How about the accountability of people like you ambushing guests on national TV to score points instead of fostering meaningful dialogue? Now visibly rattled, Joy fired back. I'm doing my job, asking the questions people want answers to. Is that what this is to you? A game of gotcha? I've spent years funding and fighting for environmental causes. What have you done, besides tear people down from behind a desk? The words landed hard. Behar's expression froze, then flushed with fury. The crowd murmured audibly. Excuse me? She snapped. What have I done? I've spent 30 years asking tough questions and holding people in power accountable. Ford wasn't done. And I've spent even longer walking the walk, supporting legislation, funding climate research, advocating for science-based policy. You don't get to question my integrity because you pulled a few spreadsheets off the internet. Joy fired back, shaking with rage. Don't talk to me about integrity, Harrison. You're not some untouchable hero just because you played Indiana Jones. Ford rose halfway out of his chair, voice tight and furious. And you're not a journalist just because you've got a microphone. The air in the studio was electric. The audience sat frozen, unsure if they were witnessing a meltdown or a moment of truth. The other hosts were visibly panicked, unsure how to stop the escalating confrontation. Ford's voice dropped low, nearly a growl. You've crossed the line today. This isn't journalism. This is personal. Behar stood too now, pointing a finger. It became personal when you decided to lie to the public. Ford stared at her, chest rising and falling. I don't lie, Joy. I've lived more real life than half this town's phonies, and I won't sit here and let you spin some tabloid smear campaign in the name of honesty. Behar, red-faced and visibly trembling, opened her mouth to respond, but Ford didn't wait. He stood up completely now, towering over the panel. And I don't need some daytime television host lecturing me about my personal life. You want to talk about my environmental record? Fine, let's talk about it. But let's also acknowledge that from the very beginning, you've steered this entire exchange into something hostile instead of approaching it as a real, respectful dialogue. It was now unmistakable. The tone had shifted entirely. What began as a standard promotional appearance had devolved into a volatile face-off, with tensions high and neither party showing signs of retreat. The audience could feel it in the air. This wasn't just another celebrity Q&A. It had become a battle of egos, ideologies, and pride. The mood in the studio thickened with every passing second. Ford and Behar sat opposite each other, like two seasoned opponents unwilling to blink first. The casual coffee table ambiance was now the backdrop for one of daytime TV's most intense standoffs. You know what, Joy? Ford said, his voice lowered into that sharp, almost cinematic whisper, one that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Let's stop pretending this is about values. This is about spectacle. Behar's face tensed with outrage. That's an outrageous accusation. I don't manufacture conflict. I ask real questions that matter. Real questions? Ford challenged, leaning forward, voice clipped with disbelief. Or you just playing prosecutor, hoping to catch me off guard for ratings? Since when did this show become a courtroom? Around them, co-hosts exchanged glances, looking unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. They sat frozen, spectators in what felt more like a live debate than a morning interview. I'm holding you accountable for your public statements. If that feels uncomfortable, maybe it's because you're not used to being challenged. And if you can't challenge someone without turning it into a spectacle, maybe you're not the right person to be hosting a show like this. Want to hear about my environmental work? You skipped a few facts. My foundation has reforested regions, built clean energy networks, and supplied clean water to communities across 3 continents. Behar dismissed the claim with a wave of her hand. Money can solve problems, but that doesn't excuse living in luxury while preaching sacrifice. You want to talk contradictions? Ford shot back, now visibly furious. Try looking in the mirror. You spend your time criticizing others while hiding in a safe studio, never getting your hands dirty. Behar's voice spiked with fury. I do more than criticize. I confront power and demand answers. That's my role. That's journalism. No, that's ambushing guests under the guise of journalism. That's what you're doing. The chaos was mounting. Behind the scenes, producers scrambled, while the other panelists looked torn between letting it unfold or stepping in. Behar's tone rose. I'm doing what's necessary, asking hard questions about hypocrisy and responsibility. That's my job. And if your job is turning every conversation into an ambush, maybe it's time to ask whether you belong in this chair at all, Ford said, his frustration now boiling over. You don't want real answers, Joy. You want a viral soundbite. You fly private while lecturing on carbon emissions. I call that hypocrisy. Ford abruptly stood, the chair dragging loudly. And I call this a staged takedown masked as concern. You've twisted everything I came here to discuss. Sit down, Harrison, Behar snapped, her voice firm and brimming with authority. Ford glared at her. Don't order me around. This whole setup has been a performance, your performance. This is real. It's about truth and justice, Behar shouted, rising to meet him. No, this is about ego, Ford said through clenched teeth. You tear people down to inflate your own relevance. You care more about being seen as a tough journalist than fostering real dialogue. That struck a nerve. Behar's face contorted with anger. You think you're some kind of hero? You know nothing about what I've built or the integrity I bring. And you know nothing about me, Ford shot back. All you know are headlines and assumptions. But here's the difference. I admit I'm flawed. I'm not pretending to be a moral authority. I've earned my place here, Behar screamed. I've spent 30 years asking questions that matter. I don't need to be taught down to by a Hollywood heartthrob with a God complex. Ford let out a dark laugh. There it is, the insults. When logic fails, you go for the personal attack. Whoopi tried to cut in, desperate to defuse the situation, but neither would yield. You hate that I can't be bullied or charmed, Behar snarled. You expect worship, not honesty. And I hate that someone actually tries to create change rather than just sit here tearing everyone else down, Ford said, voice sharp and cold. Their hostility was now undeniable. 2 public figures who'd peeled away their public masks to reveal the raw clash beneath. I stand for accountability, Behar said, voice trembling. You stand for hiding behind privilege. And I stand for truth, which is more than I can say for this circus, Ford growled. It had reached the brink, neither of them willing to surrender ground. The audience felt it. The hosts felt it. The atmosphere could ignite with a spark. They stood toe-to-toe, Behar seething, Ford ice cold. You know what really bothers me about people like you, Joy? Ford said, his voice carrying a deadly calm that was somehow more menacing than his earlier anger. You sit in judgment of others while contributing nothing positive to the world. You tear people down and call it journalism. People like me? Behar's voice cracked with indignation. What exactly do you mean by that? I mean people who have made careers out of negativity, Ford replied. People who hide behind the pretense of asking hard questions while really just trying to create drama for entertainment value. Behar's face contorted with rage. You arrogant, pompous, hypocritical piece of Hollywood trash. You think your money and your movies make you better than everyone else? The personal attack crossed the line that even the heated exchange hadn't approached before. The audience gasped audibly, and the other hosts sat in stunned silence. Ford's face went completely still, a dangerous calm settling over his features. "What did you just call me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me," she shot back, seemingly oblivious to the line she had just crossed. "You're nothing but an overpaid actor who thinks his opinion matters more than anyone else's. You're a hypocrite who lectures others about responsibility while living like rules don't apply to you." Ford stared at her for a long moment, his jaw working silently. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold as ice. "You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am overpaid. I make more money than I probably deserve for pretending to be other people on screen. But at least I know what I am." "What's that supposed to mean?"